Story 1. I had about $5,000 in my checking account. Technically, I was negative $100,000 if you include student loans. Story 2. Around $2,000 in savings and $1,000 worth of premium dog food stockpiled in the closet. Not for me. Story 3. At 30, I remember starting the month €900 in the red and asking my government for emergency assistance. I received around €60 in cash, no questions asked. By around age 35, I leveled off with help from friends, and 5 years later I was able to repay the favor. Story 4. I was well below 10,000, and I did not own anything. 10 years later, the situation has not significantly changed. Story 5. At 30, I had about $5,000 in savings. I spent it all to keep my grandparents from losing their property and to keep their electricity and gas on. After my grandmother passed and my grandfather went into a care home, I was on my own again, but I never recovered. By age 40, my savings are about $100. Story 6. I wanted to buy a house by 30. I was in a lot of debt after that. Story 7. At 30, I finally started a job in my chosen career that paid enough for me to start saving. I had about $1,000 in savings and did not own anything. 10 years later, I am still in the same career. I bought and sold a house and later bought another. I have about $25,000 in savings, and my wife and I each have nice cars. Never judge your progress based on anyone else. There is no timetable for finances. My dad did not own his first house until he was in his 50s. Story 8. Non-existent, laughing out loud. I could not save in this economy right now even if I wanted to. Just about every cent I make goes toward bills. Story 9. On my 30th birthday, my net worth was negative $320,000. Thanks, medical school. Story 10. Far better than 38. Divorce is financially draining. Story 11. I am 28. I own a house that I will be paying off for a long time, a car that is paid off, 2 retirement funds from 2 separate jobs, an emergency fund with $10,000, and another $8,000 in savings for house repairs. Aside from the house, I have no debt. Overall, that is going well, but I miss the large amount of savings I used for the down payment. Story 12. At age 30, I had approximately $21,000 saved, including $3,000 in an individual retirement account. Currently, at age 35, I have approximately $92,000 saved, including $41,000 in an individual retirement account. Story 13. My 20s were rough for my financial picture. I married at 24 and had my first child at 25. I work in law enforcement and my wife worked part-time as a registered nurse. We both had new car payments and student loan debt. We purchased our home in 2016 with a $10,000 down payment. We were never really paycheck to paycheck, but we had to be mindful of our spending and budget every month. It took us about 5 years to save around $18,000, a couple thousand a year. We were also simultaneously putting 20% into future retirement. Then the magical thing happened. We paid off our vehicles. We sold our first home and made about $70,000 on it during the coronavirus housing boom. We bought our next family home as we had our second child. My wife got a higher paying job. By age 32, we had about $70,000 in savings. We paid off the remainder of our student loans in a lump sum, about $26,000, and we began living debt-free aside from our mortgage. Life seemed great and picture-perfect. Then I found out about my wife's affair with a coworker at her new job. We separated and have been separated for about 9 months. I have learned about other men she has been involved with. I am now divorcing her. My finances are taking a huge blow. I am losing half of my pension and half of my side retirement and investment account. Moral of the story: neither of us had high-paying jobs, but we were smart with money and paid off debt. Once debt was paid off, the cash flow was excellent, with lots of room to spend and save. The bigger lesson is to choose your partner wisely. It is the biggest decision of your life and more important than finances. Story 14. Around $375,000. I recognize that my situation is an outlier. I started investing 21% when I was 19. I made some good decisions. Story 15. I had about $15,000 saved. Then I lost my job, have not been able to find a new one, and it is all gone. I am 31 years old. Story 16. Enough for half of a down payment on a house. To be fair, I had been saving $500 a month for 5 years. That cash came out of my paycheck just after my rent was paid. I learned that from friends. Story 17. I moved to another country with 1,000 euros in my pocket when I was 20. I worked while studying, had cheap housing, and saved every cent. My weekly grocery list was a pack of cheap muesli and some milk. I am 29 now and own half of an apartment in my home country and 50,000 euros. It was a long ride, and I am not even at the end. Story 18. Close to $200,000. I saved a lot by living at home until age 30. My parents wanted me to save. They knew my wife and I wanted to start a family. They often said they survived the 2008 collapse because they had savings, while many of their friends lost cars and homes. Before I moved out, my phone was still on their family plan and my car insurance was on their policy. They refused to accept payment. I would buy groceries or small vacations for them as a thank you. I put $75,000 down on my house, invested $20,000 in stocks and cryptocurrency, and put additional funds into my business. By age 31, my accounts did not look so good. I laughed because the money was invested and started coming back. It is surprising how fast money goes and returns. They made it a lot easier for me to move out on my own. Story 19. I am 29 right now, but I have about 180,000 across a few different accounts. I have no debt at the moment. Story 20. At age 30, the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic began, and I had to spend my life savings to ensure my family could eat. Story 21. I had paid off my student loans and squirreled away about $100,000 in liquid assets by age 30. In 2008, in early 2009, when the market had bottomed out, I invested most of my savings in stocks. Among my holdings were 16,000 shares of a small company, NVIDIA, which I had bought at 25 cents per share. Being a personal computer and technology aficionado, I used a good part of the rest of my savings a few years later on a new high-end computer with 3 video cards in a Tri-Fire configuration. I had a passing hobby of mining and accrued just over 1,000 Bitcoin. My ex convinced me to sell the Bitcoin in 2013 because she wanted to go on a few vacations and rent a nicer apartment. My now wife convinced me to liquidate my NVIDIA shares in 2016 to reduce tax liability after we moved to another country. It ended up helping to buy our first house. Still, fuck me. Story 22. $0 net worth at age 30. Now 49 years old with a net worth of $1,450,000. Story 23. I'm honestly surprised by all the replies. It's great to hear everyone's experiences. I was absolutely devastated by the coronavirus disease 2019 and my small business was wiped out. I had $15 left in my checking account and even sold all my stocks to pay rent. This was in 2022 and I had just turned 30. 3 years later, I have been aggressively saving, building out clients for my side hustle, and I have no debt. My student loans are paid off. I have about $40,000 in stocks and $10,000 in cash. For anyone stressing at 30 years old, it gets better, you just have to save. Story 24. Nothing. Now, 20 years later, it is looking a lot better. Story 25. I'm turning 30 in a month, and I have no debt and about $390,000. Story 26. At 30, my wife and I had about $20,000 in savings and zero in retirement. By 40, we had over $1 million in liquid investments and about $1 million combined in retirement. A lot can change in your 30s. I am in my mid-40s. My wife and I have separated. We each have a net worth of about $2.5 million. Story 27. I left my marriage at age 32 with no savings and little debt. Story 28. I had about $3,000 to $5,000 saved. At that age, I was in my first home, so I was not spending as much because homeownership tends to bring expensive surprises. Story 29. I had a career. I lost my job at 29 in an unfavorable market. I have now been unemployed for over a year, but I am back in school so I can start fresh. My savings are not going well right now, but we will get there. Story 30. I had a $3 million stock portfolio, 3 homes, and was making oodles of money. Apparently, most everyone here. Story 31. I had approximately $500,000 when I turned 30. All those years in my 20s of saving and investing an average of 40% of my income started paying off. Story 32. At 30, if I died, I would be too broke to be worth the dirt they'd bury me in. Story 33. Savings were just a dream. I could barely pay the rent. I was newly divorced and living on a graduate student's income. Story 34. Buying a modest condominium in my late 20s was the best decision I have ever made. The mortgage was less than what I would have spent on rent in the area. I moved out a few years later, and it has been a stable rental property for about 7 years, during which its value has doubled. Story 35. I am 30 years old. I have about $1.2 million total from equity in 2 properties, my brokerage account, my 401k retirement account, and other investment accounts. Story 36. It was abysmal. I finally started a 401k retirement plan at about that age and have not touched it since. 23 years later, it looks pretty good, thankfully. Story 37. Every time I had a bit of savings, I took another step in life. I had a wedding, moved for a new job, and became a parent. Currently, my family is my savings plus about $500. Story 38. About 50,000 euros. I finished university and started working in my chosen career at 25. I had 10,000 euros in savings back then because I worked throughout university and that covered my expenses while my parents were still legally obligated to contribute. All of that went into savings, which is where the initial 10,000 euros came from. Ever since, I have had a surplus of about 10,000 euros every year, less in the first 2 years, after which I received a substantial promotion. That is where the other 40,000 euros came from. That was a year ago, and I am close to reaching 60,000 euros. I should reach it by the end of the year. Overall, it took me too long to start investing my savings. I could have easily made another few thousand euros if I had started at 25 rather than last year. Story 39. I would guess around 150,000, but that also reflects the fact that I lived my whole 20s like a recluse, and that is not a good way to live. Story 40. I have 13,000 euros in savings right now. It would have been more, but I spent several thousand euros on school, a camera, and immigration lawyers this year. I earned 60,000 euros this year as a freelance artist while also being a full-time student with classes about 12 hours a day, 5 or 6 days per week for most of the year. I also spent about 4 months traveling this year. I have been broke for most of my life and need to improve my frugality. Story 41. The amount you were worth at 30 is far less important than the principles you ideally learned in your 20s. Frugality, living below your means, and understanding the substantive difference between needs and wants are what matter. If you have mastered those principles, the numbers will follow. The most important factor in accumulating significant wealth is time, and that is still on your side when you are young. Story 42. $120,000 in cash and $400,000 in equities. However, this is for a dual-income household. Story 43. I am 29 now and have around $41,000. I have very few assets and live alone, but I am comfortable. Story 44. If you have any savings and no debt, you are probably doing pretty well. Story 45. My $250,000 house is paid off. I have $100,000 in investments and $60,000 in student debt. I have been both very lucky and unlucky in my life. Story 46. Right now, I have a net worth of $700,000 at 29 years old. I started investing consistently during the coronavirus pandemic and have invested heavily since then. I keep spending to a minimum. Do your due diligence, read the personal finance forum on Reddit, and come up with a plan. Allocate every dollar. I bought a primary residence with a 30-year mortgage because rent in my area kept rising every year. Getting ahead is hard, but that is why you must invest aggressively to keep pace. Story 47. At age 31, I had bought my house 3 years earlier and owned about 5% of a house worth $120,000. 2. I had 3 years in a 401k retirement plan with contributions at 15%, so the balance was about $20,000 to $30,000. 3. I had 6.5 years of military service, so I was about 1/3 of the way to a pension. 4. I had about $500 in savings. Story 48. I remember this because I was 30 years old when I refinanced my mortgage down to 3.125%, had a very stable job, and used most of my $30,000 in savings to pay off all of my unsecured debt. I also had about $50,000 in my 401k retirement account and $10,000 in a 529 college savings plan. We had 3 children at that time, and that was expensive, but I felt financially secure with good cash flow and no bad debt. Story 49. Edit. I am 30. I am fortunate to have healthy savings in the 3 digits. I have saved since I babysat as a teenager and continued through my nursing career. I bought 2 houses and sold one, and I own my car. I have a student loan to pay off that I have been too lazy to address, but it is first on my to-do list for 2026. I invest with a Roth individual retirement account. My parents were not careful with money, which motivated me to research and save for myself, and it paid off. Story 50. At age 30, I had about $30,000 and no debt. At age 35, I am in significant debt. Things are not going well. Story 51. Maybe $1,000 to $2,000 at age 30 and a lot of debt. Now my wife and I are in our mid-40s. We have about $30,000 in a high-yield savings account. No debt other than the house, $50,000 owed, and a $400,000 value. We own only 1 car and have about $150,000 in individual retirement accounts. We recently set up our trust and estate for our daughter, so she is taken care of, and we both have life insurance. Story 52. I had a higher net worth at age 29 than I do now, 25 years later, thanks to the dot-com crash. Story 53. I am over 60. I had no savings in my 30s. It was all debt from building my life. My emergency fund relied on credit. Story 54. I have a decent pension, but at age 30 I had $100,000. Divorce is no joke. Story 55. I was $5,000 in debt. 10 years later, I had $120,000 in equity and $40,000 in investments and savings. Story 56. In my late 20s, it was tens of thousands. In my 30s, it's nothing because I am drowning in debt. Story 57. At 30 years old, I had 0 savings and $60,000 in student loans. Story 58. I have a bag of rice under the kitchen sink. Does that count? Story 59. I am 25. I have $4,500 in savings, with another $1,000 loaned to someone that I expect to be repaid. I have an individual retirement account with a balance of $10,500 that I started with $6,000 a few years ago, and I have $2,800 in an exchange traded fund that I started with $2,000 about 18 months ago. I have never held a job that paid more than $20 an hour, and I have never held 2 jobs at once. I cook most of my meals at home, I buy video games and computer parts, and I split rent with my girlfriend. Story 60. A big, fat 0. Technically in the negative because of debt. Adult life has not been easy. Story 61. I am 31 now. From 28 to 31, I was stuck taking care of my mom when she lost the ability to walk as we navigated the disability system in America. When I moved in with her, I had $2,000. I thought I would only be there a few months while her leg healed, and after 6 months my money ran out, so I got a job in her town. I got my savings up to about $5,000. Then I finally moved back home, and my industry entered the slow season, so my savings started dwindling again. I just had a $900 car repair, so I think I have about $3,000 in savings, maybe. But my fridge and freezer are full. My car works. My rent is only $400 a month. Life is pretty good. I just need to keep saving and hope nothing else breaks. Story 62. About $3.50. Now I am 44, and I will not stop until I get it all back. Story 63. If you saved a lot, family can definitely help. One thing I thank my parents for is that they started me with a couple $1,000s in stocks when I was born. Every birthday and any cash I received went into that account. Holiday gifts and small portions of my summer job pay. I was upset as a kid because I couldn't buy video games or toys, but as an adult I am very grateful. Even a couple $1,000s invested over 25 years can amount to a lot. I used the savings as a down payment on a house, and when housing prices rose I sold. Story 64. I am 46 and I have never successfully saved anything. Story 65. Savings account at 30? That was when the bank started sending me Christmas cards thanking me for my generous contribution of $. Story 66. I am financially healthy. I had about $350,000, if I recall correctly, between checking, savings, and retirement accounts. I am 32 now, and that total is closer to $600,000 because the stock market has performed well. I also own a rental property. Story 67. At 30, I had very little in savings, probably around $10,000, which was about 3 months' expenses for me at the time. I also had zero debt. I had paid off my student loans and credit cards in full, so in that sense I was doing pretty well. In my late 30s, I had a major setback that wiped out a large portion of my savings. A medical catastrophe cost me over $15,000. Took a while to recover. Other than that, I have been able to stay afloat and save over the last decade. I am not rich, but I do not have to stress too much. Story 68. I am currently 30 years old. I have around $10,000 in liquid assets, $50,000 in gold and silver, $300,000 in my Roth individual retirement account, $150,000 in my 401k retirement account, and $50,000 in my individual trading account. My house is paid off and worth $400,000. My business and its associated buildings are worth around $750,000. My net worth is closing in on $2 million. My younger brother is 23 and is the head of a department at a multimillion-dollar company. He got into Bitcoin in middle school, so he is worth about 10 times as much as I am. Comparison is the thief of joy. My father was $500,000 in debt at age 30 to start his business. He is now in his mid-60s and has a 9-figure net worth. Story 69. We had $300 or less. At age 30, we had 2 children. My husband had emergency back surgery and was off work for 25 weeks that year. We barely kept our heads above water. Then we found out we did not qualify for any government help because he had made too much in previous quarters. The children were young. I was still trying to work part-time while juggling the children and his physical therapy schedule. Now, at 37, we have $10,000 in the bank and are praying we can get to tax return season. By saving more and after taxes, we may have $18,000 in the bank before another surgery. I am thinking the surgery will be before Christmas. Story 70. After college, I aimed for a 6-figure income by age 30. I saved as much as I could while still taking part in activities typical of my 20s. It turns out that dedicating myself to a career makes it much harder to spend money on leisure. Story 71. $24,000. Then the ex-partner spent it all. Now it is $0. I am 53 years old. I never recovered financially. A bad relationship can cause many problems. Younger people still do not seem to grasp that. Story 72. I currently have over $100,000 and I do not earn a large income. I live at home. My parents pay for my phone and car insurance and do not require me to pay rent. They do not give me money. I also pay almost $600 a month for my health and dental insurance. I am careful with my money and do not spend it carelessly. I recently invested a large amount to earn interest. My father invests heavily and teaches me. Story 73. I got married at 21. My wife cleared out my account as soon as I put her on it. To be fair, we started our family right away and had 2 children by the time I was 30. My account stayed empty until I started saving for retirement instead of buying amenities such as a big house, bigger television, new phones, a new computer, and new cars. Once I began investing in my savings accounts and my 401k retirement plan, I started amassing funds. I wished I had started saving sooner, but I began my career before 401k plans were common and I thought my pension would carry me. It did not. Today, at 63, I am medically retired and receive disability benefits and a pension. I still cannot afford my medication. Pay yourself first. Know that experiences are more valuable than things. You do not need a new car, a new house, or a new phone. You will not remember these items in your later years, but you will remember experiences. Buy new things only when you have the cash to buy them outright or can make a large down payment that results in a low interest rate. This increases your equity in your home. Drive your car until repair costs exceed the cost of a newer vehicle. Loans can be paid off faster, especially if you avoid agreements that prohibit early payoff. Keep a phone until it breaks or no longer receives Apple operating system updates. A sparser home is easier to clean. You do not need to leave behind a pile of worthless stuff. Invest in yourself and delay non-essential purchases until you can get better deals on what you need for modern life. Pay yourself first. Story 74. I was 30 when my bank account hit zero for the first time in several years. Being without a job for a few months can really drain you quickly. I technically had $40,000 in my 401k retirement plan, but that is an absolute last resort. Story 75. I will let you know in 1 year and 7 months. If I am on the same trajectory, I will be $15,000 in debt with only emergency savings. Story 76. I am in my 30s. I have about $2,000 and a motorcycle worth about the same. I returned to school a couple of years ago, hoping to double that amount by the time I am 40. I would like to say I am joking about aiming to only double it, but with the way the economy is going, I am not sure anymore. The information technology and gaming bubbles have just burst, which makes this an interesting time to be graduating soon. Story 77. 100,000 at 21. I splurged and rescued many dogs when Frenchies were being horribly bred. They still are. Now 31,000 and growing. No regrets. I love all the dogs I rescued. Story 78. It was not bad. I had received large bonuses from a few jobs and was fortunate to work for a company that went public. I was not rich and still had a lot of debt, but I could have been fine for a few years without a job. Story 79. I owned a rundown house in a poor neighborhood, and the bank owned 95% of it anyway. That was it. Story 80. I started saving in my 40s. I already owned 2 apartments then. Now I own 3. To keep them running, I need savings. Story 81. My partner and I had $150,000 saved when I was 30, not including what was in my retirement account and their provident fund. Now we are down to $70,000. We had some job changes that required us to dip into our savings this year. Hopefully we can turn things around next year. Story 82. I was debt-free and had about 4 to 5 months worth of savings. I had to move to another town, received a condominium from my parents, and had to renovate it. I have been at net zero for the last year and a half and will be for another 6 months. Now my parents are not asking for the condominium back, even though we had a verbal agreement that I would have it after I finished renovating it. I was financially devastated. Story 83. I am 30 now and have 90,000 in savings. I was at 100,000 until I started building this barndominium and would have had well over 180,000 in savings if it had not been for this build. I am scared of debt. I grew up watching my mother and father struggle and cry over debt and how broke we were. Ever since then, I started saving. I did not know how much was enough, but I have not been below 20,000 for over a decade now. I am working over 70 hours a week right now. So far, out of pocket, I have spent 90,000 on this build and have used 175,000 from the bank. I am hoping to only use about 220,000 from the bank. That will be a payment I can afford, and I plan on working 70 hours a week until I am back up to 100,000 in savings. Story 84. I had about $20,000 and perhaps twice that in a 401k retirement account. That was around the time I landed a high-paying job, and everything changed shortly after. I cannot stress this enough. Save more in your 20s and spend less. Story 85. I probably had about $5,000, but turning 30 made me realize I needed to get serious about it. That was when I started putting money into our 401k retirement plan. Story 86. I was so poor at 30 that we cut out green cardboard paper in the shape of a tree and taped it to the wall because we could afford a Christmas tree. Those were hard times. Story 87. Nothing. I had about $15,000 saved when I was 27, but I decided I hated my career and went back to school, so I spent it. Story 88. I had saved $30,000 by age 25 and desperately wanted to buy my own house. I bought the house, but now I have no savings. Story 89. Reading these makes me feel a bit better. I am 28 years old and I have $5,400 in savings that I can access, and another $12,000 split between registered retirement savings plan and deferred profit sharing plan accounts. I had a bit more, but I used $3,000 of it to fund a trip to France. All of my friends have six-figure jobs and are talking about buying houses, and I am doing my best on an income of $40,000, but it is hard. Story 90. I'm 31. My goal was to have a house by the time I was 30. Laughing out loud. Honestly, it seems like I'm doing a little better than most here. I've got $7,000 saved and another $12,000 in retirement. Still pretty shit, though. Story 91. I will be 30 in a year. I currently have $300,000 in savings, not including retirement accounts. Story 92. I am not 30 yet, but I have about $12,000 in liquid savings and $34,000 invested. Story 93. That was a few years back, but I would say roughly $30,000 in liquid savings. Story 94. My balance bounces between $5,000 and $7,000, but my wife and I earn about $180,000 a year. We both invest 20% of our income, and we have about $30,000 in post-tax funds outside of 401k retirement accounts that we could access in an emergency. We contribute $500 a month to that. Story 95. My remaining parent died when I was in my 20s. I inherited a substantial sum. At 30, I had not fully formed my plans for the money, so it was just sitting in the bank. Story 96. A couple of $1,000s in a savings account, about the same in a brokerage account, and maybe $10,000 in retirement that was melting down in the financial crisis. Story 97. My savings at age 30 was about $15,000 in 1991. I had been laid off from a job and decided to move to an area I loved. I found a job that did not pay much, basically starting over, and my savings helped me make ends meet. I am still working there 34 years later and am close to retirement. Story 98. Did not exist. Trying not to go negative each paycheck. Mostly successful throughout the year. Story 99. $0. I had just paid off all my student loans and my car loan. Story 100. At age 30, I had a negative net worth. I probably had about $50,000 in a 401k retirement plan, a car loan on a used car, and I was upside down on my mortgage due to the mortgage crisis. Story 101. $70,000 just before the pandemic. Then I remembered that those who held through or bought more during the Great Recession came out far ahead. So I invested everything and every extra penny in the stock market during the pandemic. I came out very well, and if I had sold my meme stocks after they skyrocketed, I would have reached financial independence and early retirement by now. Story 102. I had just plundered my 401k retirement plan to keep the wolf from the door. I had nothing left. Story 103. How do you define savings? Cash only? Cash plus investments and pensions? Or net worth including home equity? Story 104. I was still recovering from the recession, so I had no savings and had just started a 401k retirement plan. I do not know how much is in my 401k retirement plan now, but I have been investing between 6 and 10% depending on the employer match since then. My available savings fluctuate. I build them up, and then an emergency drains them. After replacing a stove, paying for a car repair, and covering a pet illness, my available savings are now under $400. Story 105. After paying for my honeymoon, I had about $11,000 in my account that I had saved over the previous 6 years of working. I had minimal investments aside from the teacher's retirement system. Having dual incomes before coronavirus disease 2019 helped us pay down debt and build larger savings. Story 106. I spent my 401k retirement account to stay alive while I was unemployed and sick for 3 years. I am $100,000 in debt. I have a minimum wage job and am not doing well. Story 107. Non-existent. I was knee-deep in parenthood and building a business. Things look a lot different now at 38. Story 108. 2009. Student loan balance more than $150,000. Credit card balance $0. Bank account balance $3,000. For 401k retirement plan with a 50% employer match up to 6%, balance approximately $5,700. Brokerage account balance $32,000. Overall, each day I woke up owing about $85 in interest payments. That was 2009. I was making $10 to $15 per hour working 2 jobs. Story 109. At age 30, I was less than 1 year into my career and had just completed a 4-year professional doctorate. I had a negative net worth, mostly from student loans, about $3,000 in credit card debt from simply surviving, and no savings. Story 110. At age 30, after accounting for student loans and car debt, my net worth was $0. At age 38, after listening to countless financial podcasts such as Minority Mindset and Dave Ramsey, it took me a few years to pay everything off and turn things around. I now have no debt, and my net worth is approximately $150,000, mostly in retirement investments. I will have a pension in addition to my Roth individual retirement account and 401k retirement account. I am also saving roughly 30% of my income for retirement. I wish I had started sooner, but there is still plenty of time to save. Buying a house may take longer. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.